Have you ever been reading a book and wondered how a word is pronounced? I think we all have. You first start by trying to sound it out, and then you say the word faster and faster until you feel confident enough that you know how to pronounce it. And then you use it while speaking to someone and they correct you. Let's take the word thought. Why is it not pronounced like though? Thote. Or thote. You look over and you see Spanish sitting in the corner, looking smug that he's got a phonetic spelling system, and dream of having a language that spelling makes sense. You then look to the other corner and you see French and you think, well, at least English isn't that bad. I don't understand how "au" is spelt E-A-U-X. I've lived in France for 6 years, and if you think spelling in English is hard, wait till you look at French, because there are so many words that do not make sense. But why is it that English spelling's so weird? Well, today we're diving into the mysteries behind English's abysmal spelling. The history. To understand how English became the way it is, we need to go back in time. The modern English language has evolved over many centuries and has been influenced by various languages like Old English, French, Latin, German, Anglo-Saxon, and many more. Because of this, English inherited a mismatch of spelling patterns and pronunciations. Like in France, where you have Brittany, Occitanie, Normandy, and other regions that aren't as important. Back in the day, I'm gonna get cancelled in France for that. Back in the day, these places had their own languages, Breton, Occitan, and Norman, respectively. In the UK, we had a similar thing. West Saxon, Northumbrian, Mercian, Kentish, and we also had our own languages, like different types of Gaelic, Cornish, and my favourite British language, Welsh. These languages don't really exist anymore, but thankfully, some of the languages like Welsh and Cornish still do to some extent. And thankfully in Wales there are schools that are fully Welsh speaking and they teach English more like a second language because they don't really need to teach English. Everyone there's going to end up speaking it. It's the national language of England and all their media is going to be in English. So they're trying to preserve the Welsh language and it's beautiful. But this video isn't about how much I love Welsh, it's about why English became the Frankenstein's monster of languages it is today. The areas of the UK that spoke these languages and dialects often warred with each other, and because of that, the languages often intermixed. Because of these wars, a kind of English developed that we call Old English, with only a few words differing between different areas, like how I call this thing a bap, and everyone else is wrong. So, we had this thing called Old English, which sounded very Germanic thanks to the invasions of many Vikings and barbarians that influenced the even more ancient languages. Then, in 1066, some guy called Guillaume le Bâtard, Prince of Normandy, tried to invade England. And if you want to watch a video on this, then I really recommend the video by Oversimplified, which I'll link in the description. Spoiler alert, this guy Guillaume won the war and conquered England. He then became who we now refer to as William, Guillaume, the Conqueror. Then, to solidify his claim on the English throne, he went around the country quashing several rebellions. After William became king, he then needed to create his court. Well, answer me this, what's the easiest thing to do? Is it 1. Learn the language of the country you've just invaded? 2. Teach all of the nobles of the area your language, French. Or 3. Install all of your mates, who already speak French, as members of your court. That's right, it's 3. So now French starts changing English. The animal is a cow, but we eat beef, from the French bœuf. The animal's a pig, but we eat pork, from the French porc. You don't have a room, but a chamber, a chambre. And all of the classier words in English referring to governing became French words. We fight to be independent, or indépendant. The French had a revolution, or a révolution. I could go on, but I think this visual will give a better explainer than me. someone wanted, very stupidly, to hold a referendum on the English language to remove all of the French words in English by using a ton of French words and one Latin one. It's hilarious to think that someone wanted to remove those words because they're so integrated into what English is today. So, William continues to take out a few rebellions and then explodes. Literally. His son then becomes William II, and so on for a couple of kings until we end up with this weird English-French hybrid that we call Middle English. Middle English has a really good reign of 400 odd years until around 1450 CE, when we had another development in the English language. In 1440, a German man on exile in Strasbourg started experimenting with printing. And by 1450, Johann Gutenberg invented the printing press. In Europe, it existed in Asia way before this. But this is about Europe. And, we have a long history of erasing Asian and African inventions. So, Johann Gutenberg won, kind of. Johann Gutenberg started to print books in his own dialect of German, translating them from Greek and Latin, and thus standardizing how German's written by using his own dialect. He made German spelling the way it is because he got there first. After only a couple of decades, the printing press had taken over Europe and changed countries like Italy, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, Spain, pretty much everywhere in Europe. All of these countries were working on translating their own books that they'd written in their own languages into Latin, which was at that point the lingua franca of academia in Europe. Any published texts in academia were all written in Latin. But English wasn't quite included in this. So, we now meet the man who changed English forever. An Englishman called William Saxton. Saxton was an English diplomat living in Bruges, Belgium. But, being a lover of literature, he moved to Cologne in Germany, where he could learn the art of printing. After perfecting it, Saxton moved back to Bruges and bought a printing press with him. With his new toy, he translated the first book into English, Recueil des Histoires de Troyes. Following this, Saxton continued to translate and print many works into English, such as The Game and Play of Chess. Then, in 1476, Saxton returned to England and established a printing press in Westminster. Having already stated, the lingua franca of Europe at the time was Latin, and the majority of publishers across Europe translated from their original languages to Latin in order to sell to the mass market. Saxton, however, decided to translate these works from Latin into English. But a problem arose. How do you write a book in English when there isn't a standardized version of writing it? Each part of the country had their own dialect and form of spelling. Well, answer me this again. What do you do when publishing books to the masses? Do you A. Learn all the dialects across the UK and print books using all of the respective dialects? Or B. Do you use the dialect of London, Middle English, for all the books you translate and thus decide how all words should be spelt yourself? That's right, the easiest one. B. So, because Saxton was the chief printer of the crown, the English that was spoken in London, and thus by the king, was the English that was used for all translations. Saxton continued to work for the royal court throughout the reign of several kings, and thanks to his ability to print quickly, he was eventually asked by Henry VII in 1485 to print all of his royal statutes. These were published for the first time in Saxton's English, instead of French. This solidified how English would be spelt forever. Now you hopefully understand how English became the English that it is today, but let's now dive into why English spelling is a joke. We all know that in English there are words with silent letters, such as night, knife, lamb, thumb, what, where, whale, and many more. But if these words are pronounced without the K and the H and the B, why are they written that way? Well, the short story is that these words were originally pronounced as knight, knife, thumb, lamb, what, where, and whale. There are even some parts of northern England and Scotland where they pronounce the H in words like what, where, when, and whale. But an event called the Great Vowel Shift happened, and this changed everything. This took place over around 300 years, between 1400 and 1700, and no one's really quite certain why it happened, but there are many theories as to why. Migration, the French changing English words with French words, and then having a lot of wars with France causing an anti-French sentiment that made the English want to change how their words were pronounced. So we had words like migration become migration, and other changes from the standard French pronunciation. But the main differences caused by the Great Vowel Shift, lo and behold, was how vowels were pronounced. Let's try and run through some of these changes. Wish me luck, I'm not a linguist, I just like accents and spelling. So, let's take the word bite. Beat, bait, bite, bite. Out. Oot, oat, out, out. Meat. Mate, meat, meat. Boot. Boat, boot, boot. Meat. Met, mate, meat. Boat. Bought, bot, boat. Mate. Mart, met, mate. Over time, the pronunciation of English words evolved. But because our friend William Saxton had already standardized English spelling, the spelling of a lot of words didn't change to reflect their new pronunciations. There are a few words that did change, of course, over the years. However, this is mainly due to anti-French sentiment. The reason that we have a B in words such as det and doubt is because of these feelings. Wanting English to look less like French, the spellings of these words were changed to reflect their Latin roots. Det became det. Doute became doubt. Okay, we'll get to the thick of it. Let's have a look at the dreaded OUGH, and why thought, though, thorough, cough, hiccup, and furlough are all pronounced differently. The simple explanation for this is that all of these words have different etymologies and are derived from different languages and dialects, and are pronounced in a similar way to their original language. Furlough, for example, is a loan word from Dutch, verlof. I don't know why we dropped the F at the end, but we did. And the spelling was changed to make it most likely look more like the English of the time. The word hiccup isn't derived from cough. It comes from the French word ok, to hiccup, and people started spelling hiccup with an OUGH because they thought it was similar to a cough. This process occurred over and over with many different words and is essentially the reason why so many words contain OUGH but are all pronounced differently. There are also examples of words being misinterpreted from their original source. The word scissor has a double S in it because it was mistakenly thought to come from the root cis, as in scission, meaning to separate from a group. But the word actually is derived from cis, like the word incision. And foreign has a G in it because it was apparently respelled to be more in line with words like sovereign and reign. They wanted it to look more posh, so they made it look more posh. The reason that spelling in English doesn't make sense is because it doesn't. There are a few tricks for learning pronunciation in English, and I'm going to discuss those in a future video, but the biggest tip I can give you today is to speak English. Make mistakes, and try again until you get it right. While English can be daunting and English spelling is a nightmare and is quite often stupid, it's also a testament to the rich history of the language itself. It's been around for centuries, and it's been changed over centuries. Thank you so much for joining me on this in-depth exploration of English spelling, and If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe to the channel. And if you've got any future video recommendations, I'd love to hear them in the comments. Or I'd love to hear your weird English spelt words, or words that are spelt weird in English, because there's a lot of them, and they're a good time. Once again, thank you for watching, and I'll be back next week with more English Essentials.